I'm hoping that either Mark or Stevie has some burning cage rattling that can kick us off with a really interesting discussion. You're smiling, Stevie. I want you to talk. Say something.
What did you have in mind?
I've got lots of cage rattling things that are not necessarily data led, but why people don't respond to emails as frequently or as promptly as they used to. And this is across the board. This is just really something's changing
Oh, I
in the
can certainly speak on
communications.
that.
Sorry?
I can certainly explain that, at
Go
least in
for
my
it. Yes,
organization.
please, go for it.
Oh, well, we use hybrid working now, so we have Teams. Teams is therefore a source of communication and organized communication in the form of, you know, team channels. It's a bit like Yammer or Slack, depending on what you use, right? So where previously the only thing that you paid attention to or needed to pay attention to was your inbox, now for us we have this squad methodology. So I've probably got 10 or 15 inboxes essentially now. So emails, you're lucky if I read an email the same day these days, whereas before it was completely different. I don't know if that's the experience of anyone else.
Is that the same for you, Mark?
Yeah, we're probably a bit more in between. We've got kind of like a mixture of email and Teams and you name it, whatever other way of getting in contact with people.
Yeah.
Because this is not just a niggle for me with Doug, it's a niggle with me for lots of other organisations that I'm involved with. The response time for people to get back to me, not given, not taking out holidays and stuff like that, it seems to be really, really slow. Is that the same at Manchester Council? Are you sort of responding less frequently to outside emails?
Yeah, I think the volume that we're dealing with is the issue at the minute. So yeah, things have slowed down.
Okay.
We just it's a complete onslaught of. I think what's happened for us is that those things that were in a state of I suppose frozen state during the pandemic that were on pause have all come rushing back to the front, and we now need to pick that work up alongside the new state of everything else is still going on. So that's the challenge we've got. So it's less about technology, albeit I do understand the Teams versus email versus other forms of chat problem, because we are wrestling with that as well. But I think it's workload more so for us.
Right, sorry, Ian, but I was just trying to kick off a cage rattle and started with one of my own, which was basically people don't respond as quickly as they used to. So I'm now going to go completely up and down the agenda and explain again that Martin Squires can't chair this meeting because he has a work meeting. Martin Callingham, who would have stood in for him, has got to pick up his wife, maybe from hospital today, so he's on standby. You've got me. So we'll do the introductions for everyone. So on my screen, I'm first. So I'm Jan. I'm co-director with Tim of Doug. Mark, can you introduce yourself?
Mark Bass from GSK. I head up data and science analytics in the UK part of GSK.
Sandra, you're muted.
Sorry, I've never used WebEx before. I am Sandra Aguilera. I work in Manchester City Council as an inside manager supporting economic work and skills.
Thank you. Stevie?
Yeah, hi, I'm Stevie. I run data science and analytics innovation at Whitbread.
Cool.
Hi, Paul Holm. I'm the head of performance research intelligence at Manchester City Council. Here to talk about some of the work we're doing around cost of living and sort of get a non-public sector perspective on what some of that might mean.
And last but not least, Ian.
Yeah, Ian Sterland. I work in Sainsbury's, or work for Sainsbury's and in Sainsbury's, heading up location analysis in the property division.
Right, so having hijacked the rattling my cage session, could you answer that question for me before I actually open it up to real problems, Ian? About are you having the same issue with external emails?
Oh, we just what in terms of response times and volume and things like that.
Mm.
Oh, and I think I came in on the end of what Stevie was saying. So I suppose in terms of channels, communication channels, we are certainly in my team, we're fairly lucky in that we've pretty much just got emails and Teams. So Teams chat and standard emails. I know, sort of tech colleagues definitely use Slack, and they probably use that chat on there. We do have Yammer in the organisation. I think it tends to be used more across stores, to be honest, and it's a great forum for people to let rip and not hold back when they want to say something to the exec. So we've just got two. I think the thing with me personally is, I can take days and sometimes weeks to respond to emails. I have a habit of ticking everything that comes in numerous times a day, and then it kind of depends on what's on as to and my memory as to how often I revisit things. The thing that I do find is I get an inordinate amount of marketing and phishing emails. Well, not phishing emails, but marketing and cold call emails through. And I think it's partly a symptom of people think I'm more senior in the organisation than I am, and that I probably hold a much bigger budget than I do. And the one that I get most often at the minute, and I suppose this is a bit of a cage rattler actually, but slightly different, is inviting me to network events. So that's either expert panels or senior sort of senior panels or network groups, and I rarely respond, and I never go, because I kind of think, how are you making your money? What's your business model? And why should I be your product? So that's I suppose that's my personal bugbear. But there are a lot of those that come through, and I think since we have gone to remote working in Sainsbury's, the volume of emails and team chats has gone up, because that's mostly because we're all working remote most of the time. That's how people get you. That's the only way people can get you. So that is definitely a feature for us.
That's really helpful. It's sort of stemmed my paranoia slightly,
Yeah,
because if you couple the holiday season with
yeah,
trying to get responses from people,
yeah,
I didn't get any at all. So
yeah.
it was it's lesson learned, but
Mm,
it's not something I'd considered. But I work from home, so I'm in isolation of team working
yeah,
in that respect. So it hadn't really occurred to me that the different communications through the organisations are changing,
yeah,
which means external communications need to change or adapt in timelines.
yeah. I mean, I was responding to someone this morning, and I was in Outlook, and I was like typing, right, let's pull up Anya's emails from yesterday. Not there. I've only got one email. Why is that? And it suddenly occurred to me that the conversation we had was in Teams.
Yes. Yeah.
So I was like, oh, that's where it is. Yeah.
Who's waving? Yeah, Stevie. You waving at me?
Yeah, no, it was like a raise your hand. I was basically just gonna concur with Ian on a couple of points. So I think there's a bit of a perfect storm going on at the moment, wherein previously small, easily answerable questions would be a question in person, or at least that occurred a lot more often, right? And so now that we've moved to a hybrid working model, which essentially means it's very unlikely the person you're talking to is in the same building at you at the same time, all of that transfers over to Teams and email. Because that's transferred over, as does the admin around organizing meetings and everything else, because that's there, that's adding to the pile of emails and Teams messages and things like that. And for me, at least, external emails are always have to go at the bottom of that pile because I've got internal responsibility, not external responsibility. That coupled with, I'm sure, Ian, if we compared inboxes, I've probably had the same series of invites as you, as well as, you know, have you considered this contract, this fixed term contract person for a role in your team? Like,
Oh God, yeah.
I'm getting these all day, right?
Yeah.
So already external emails are at the back of a long queue, and most of them are irritating and not worth spending the time on. So a lot of the time for me, I've got rules in place on my Outlook system where I don't even see them. They go in a different folder. Anything that doesn't have a Whitbread domain, different folder. And I will review that when I'm either looking for another email or when I've got an opportunity. Now, if I trust a domain, so Doug, for example, and I want to see that communication, I can whitelist that. But if I've not already made that decision due to a relationship with that business, likelihood is if it was a new company contacting me, I'm just not going to see it.
Yeah.
Or at least not have the time to read it.
And I think that's one of the advantages, I think, of having Teams chats that span organisations, if you like, because you can, you can set, you can admit, if you like, or let through, colleague, chat and messages from a group. So like a Doug group, I think that's one of the downsides of WebEx. I think when certainly for me, when I'm so used to using Teams, you can have a chat on the side of it that is persistent across different meetings. If you're always using the same sort of repeating invite or things like that, and
files and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I went to a sort of I forget what it was. It was I was going to say ONS. It might have been an ONS sort of presentation or a mini conference on sort of all family spending and household surveys and all that. And what's quite nice is that chat is still kind of going. Even though it's not in my pinned list, it's still going. And when something gets added or when they've got a bit of new news, it's still there. I could choose to exit it, I could choose to mute it, but it's actually quite useful. Quite a useful feature of Teams, anyway. Yeah.
That's really useful for me. As my responsibility with Duggan and some other organisations is communication.
Yeah.
And getting information out there, and you've really helped me understand that I need to change tack a lot.
Yeah.
And I also need not to worry about nagging, because if I've been lost and you haven't seen it, I'm not nagging you if I send it again.
Oh yeah, no, certainly for me,
and that's always an issue for me. I don't want to pester someone, stalk someone because they've not responded. But if there's an option that you've not seen it anyway, I can't be stalking you if I'm
quite happy to be pestered, because that's sometimes the only reason I do things.
Okay, I don't need to mind that twice.
That sounds really bad, but it is there are always competing priorities. Therefore, an indication of importance for. Yeah, I might see it, yes, as it, it's important but not urgent. But then obviously someone else might have a different view. So it's all good for me anyway. I don't mind.
Okay, so we've got a few more minutes left of the cage rattling, and I'm very aware that I've completely hijacked it. So, is there any other topics? Are there any other topics from Mark? Being quiet. Anything bothering you?
Not particularly. Same old stuff around recruitment isn't virtually impossible.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to get us all to go in the office a load more, which is making recruitment even harder because literally nobody wants to go into the office.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm fighting kind of like a waterfall tide of rubbish coming at me in the recruitment front. It's just not fun at all.
How have you found in terms of the variance in the quality of applicants, Mark? I've had a couple of roles that I've been recruiting for recently, and it seems to be an absolute lottery as to if you call a role, say, I don't know, senior analyst or something like that, I can get someone coming in with 10 years experience, there's someone coming in with no experience, and someone coming in with, it seems completely at random.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, half the applicants don't have any right to work in the UK.
Yeah.
If not more, probably maybe 70%. And then there's a real bell curve of optimism around I can do that. It's like, okay, so you kind of take the CV on face value. If you've asked for sort of somebody who's a senior anything, then if they've got no experience, then I'm sorry, it goes in the bin. And then you start asking questions of the people who are remaining, and you go, okay, so talk me through a fairly basic SQL query, and they don't have a clue. And tell me, what's the difference between a where and a having clause or something? It doesn't be anything complicated, and they're just completely stumped. And you go, okay, so you've told me that you've got 5 years experience in SQL, but you can't do anything in SQL that you might want to be able to do to summarize data. What are you doing?
I think it sort of harks a bit back to, there's been a bit of a long-standing bugbear in analytics in general, which is that to be an analyst doesn't require any specific accredited qualification at all, right? You can be an analyst and have a vast variant, spread of skills, experience, everything else. So that means when you advertise for that role, you end up with, it's almost opinion what that word means. And so people feel that they have to they'll just say that they can do things, and then with the opinion, I'll learn it on the job or whatever. And we've had to start putting in our, we sort of did it anyway, but a bit more so since moving to remote interview and that kind of thing, is that the questions in the interview have a whole section of questions which are on the spot. So solve this problem and talk me through how you're solving it whilst you're solving it. Because if you don't do that, there's a very real chance someone else is answering the questions on behalf of the person you're talking to.
Well, yeah, quite possibly. I mean, I know other bits of GSK using HackerRank, and in that you can tell if there's somebody even goes off the web page that they're on. There's all sorts of tracking that you can do around trying to making sure that it is the person who you've asked the questions to fill it in, but there's no absolute 100% guarantee. But yeah, I mean, we've got various case studies, and it is literally tell us how you would solve this problem.
You have to
do it live on screen. I mean, it's hard, and it's pretty brutal on the candidates. I'm not sure it's the nicest way of recruiting.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It's very difficult, and yeah, it is very personal opinion based on what they think they can do.
I was going to say, I know we're slightly different in a sense in terms of the roles that we've got, and a lot of my roles within the council are more on the sort of social researcher end rather than the out and out analytics. So we do call people analysts, but we are looking for them to have sort of social research type skills and a base statistical understanding and skill set. But some of the things that we've been trying to do over the last couple of years that have been quite fruitful is sort of better relationships with the universities. So it only works at a certain level, but there are some really good networks that exist there, and they do a lot of the hard work in, promoting and pushing the right people towards opportunities. And we've been sort of pushing them out through those forums. And I think the other thing, just thinking about testing skills, is what we've really found positive is actually setting some of those tests in advance of the interview. So we've provided those out. I suppose we haven't got the oversight of who's actually done that work outside and prepared it and submitted it. But what we do then is focus in the interview around, tell us about that test, tell us about what you did, tell us about how you understood it. So they need to demonstrate that they understood what they've submitted. So we've tried those two things, which, like I say, the university stuff's worked particularly well, building those networks with them, because they have a good sort of link into various networks.
One of the things we do is ask for to prepare candidates to prepare a 10-minute presentation on a sort of relevant subject, usually with a a technical element as part of it, or at least something we can ask about and question. But I agree. I mean, we're recruiting at the minute for someone who's experienced in sort of an analyst who's experienced in Tableau and Tableau Online in terms of developing dashboards. And we're getting, I think we get most of the applicants we're getting are very much pure tech and also not very experienced. So they're either sort of doing sort of junior roles or they come applying straight off a student visa.
You're not alone on the Tableau front, Ian. There's a team adjacent to mine, which is our BI team. There's lots of Tableau developers, and they've maybe in the last 2 months been unable to find any suitable candidate for a senior developer role. Whereas prior to that, had sort of a much nicer selection of choice, right? I guess there's a lot of mobility in the summer, and now we're getting towards the winter of this year in particular. I think it's just dried up a little bit.
Yeah. But I also think that whereas in the past we would get far more, we would attract candidates who, yes, were technical, but they also had more, I suppose, more experience or presented more knowledge of of business, if you like, of how businesses worked, of process and all of that. The candidates we seem to be getting now seem very narrow, in their experience of because I think you're right, Steve. Analyst, it's a blanket term, isn't it? You could be an insider, you could be a developer, you could be a data engineer. It kind of comes under analyst. I mean, you could even be a data scientist, really, but still be you might be doing a job that's just under the analyst banner. So yeah, it
depending on the time you have, one of the things that's proved really successful for us is recruiting. So recruiting internally with regards, so we've got lots of operations staff, which I imagine you do as well.
Yeah.
So where they've got a good knowledge of the business and they can demonstrate curiosity and interest in the subject, and so you take them on from there, and then you train them over 6 months, and they become a very good Tableau. And additionally, apprenticeships. So utilizing the apprenticeship levy to essentially very cheaply hire a number of people over a 2-year period to support them in completing their apprenticeship. Those at the end of that apprenticeship are incredibly good candidates for your business because they know the business, they know the tools, and they're coming in at an entry level. So they will eventually become probably your best analysts, right? It just takes them a few years to get there. But if you need someone now, it doesn't really help.
No, indeed.
One other thing I was just thinking that I should throw in, because I'll be crucified back at the office if I don't, is that certainly within Manchester as a city, if you're looking for recruitment in those areas and looking for people who could come from the city, we've got a number of sort of jobs fairs and connections that we make through various forums, and I could feed any of that through into our economic sort of work and skills team and sort of build it. And I think there's a jobs fair in a couple of weeks that they've got set up, and that's for a whole range of organisations to come and sort of connect in with local residents that may be able to fulfil these roles. So if you think there's anything in that, then let me know, because we can always look at whether there's a way for you to post some of that towards us and we can include it within those pieces.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
not sure whether that helps at all, Mark, or do you just feel better that everyone's suffering?
It's the same old, it's tough for everybody. I figured it would be, but it's good to know that there isn't a silver bullet that I'm missing, at least from this group. I mean, we've got apprentices, they are brilliant. They come in with so much enthusiasm, but they take a lot of time to shape. And I'm suffering because I need the people to help shape them because I can't do everything.
Yeah, they take a fair bit of management resource. I don't know if you've ever done one of those. They have a apprenticeship portfolio. That itself, supporting one apprentice to produce their portfolio and do all the commentary and everything like that, that's like a fair bit of work for someone. So yeah, it's not without cost.
Yeah, they're cheap from a headcount cost. They're not cheap from a amount of time it takes to support them cost.
I know. Sorry, go on, Mark.
But yeah, I'm looking for somebody who can come in and help do that, not somebody who's going to be doing it. And that's a real struggle. They just don't seem to exist. Yeah, I can't find people. Or at least I can't get them to apply to GSK anyway.
I know that Tim was still looking into the apprenticeship scheme that he wanted to start. They closed down applications during COVID. They haven't opened them up again, but they're muted that they may well do soon. So it might be something that Doug can help with, but not in the immediate future, Mark. So sorry about that. If there's nothing else on the cage rattling, we can move on.
I've got a small. I
Go
do
for
have
it.
one, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Go for it, yeah.
Which is basically, which I know everybody, well, I'm assuming everyone else will be feeling the same thing, is that all of our modeling and forecasting projects, let's say, at the moment, are exceedingly complex simply due to the fact that historical data, you kind of have to look back 3 years to get anything approaching normality.
Yeah.
And even when you do, usually what we're producing for is looking into a period of uncertainty in terms of inflation and recession and everything else. So trying to create a data product that is based on recent enough data to be relevant, but has an understanding of the seasonality for a full year right now, it is a really, really difficult task. And that is a standard sort of thing that we'd like to be able to do across a variety of functions and work streams, that had we been doing it 2 years ago, it would have been a much simpler starting point. So that's sort of maybe slightly more on the data science side than the analytics side in terms of building the models, but the validity of forecasting and the ways that you would analyze trends in your historical data, that is key in a lot of analytic domains. So I'm sure that's something shared by everyone else, and if anyone's got a solution, that would be great, but I'm assuming it's some sort of like time machine or dimension hopping utility or something,
I think it does test our skills, doesn't it? And the ability to come up with sort of, I suppose, viable solutions that are, in some shape, compromised, but still, but can still be useful. Because some of this stuff you have to take a punt on, don't you? You have to try and fill in the blanks or make some judgment so that you can create something, based on some assumptions.
It's really turned into an exercise in communicating to senior leadership that the appetite for risk needs to be appropriate to the data quality of the data, rather than trying to get to the same place you would have got before, because the data just doesn't really exist in the same fashion. So there's always things you can do, but if you don't want every project to take 10 times as long, you've got to sort of find a way to describe the specific impact of what you're seeing.
And I think we were kind of talking yesterday about the census. So England Wales census. I think the OA outputs are just delayed a bit, aren't they? They're going to hopefully come before the end of the year. Obviously, Scotland will lag behind that. But we were kind of talking about workplace statistics, and obviously in the 2011 census, a lot of work was done on workplace, workplace occupancy and demographics and the like through the origin destination matrix. Now, the 2021 census is probably well, it might that element might be useful, but given that when people filled it in, some of them would have been working from home, maybe a lot of them would have been working from home. How did they answer it? So there's that element as well that I think when we were talking yesterday, we were kind of saying it might be useful, might not. We might have to find an alternative. So there's be interesting to see what sort of caveats come out of the 2021 census.
We're embroiled in that at the moment. There's a huge amount and interest, linked to both points that have just been made. ONS are really struggling themselves with the pandemic element of how does that affect trends. We're having a mini battle with them at the moment because we think they completely underestimate how Manchester's performed through the pandemic. We've got a much closer finger on the pulse around what's happened, what changed, what didn't change. They've got to provide nationally valid statistical models based on samples, smoothing, segments, trends, all of these things that they're throwing into the mix, but they just don't reflect every area equally. So, just I suppose to give you all a word of warning on this, we think, the census is missing about 30 to 40,000 people within Manchester. And that's over and above the people that weren't there at the point of the census. So we get the fact that the census was done at a point in time. So it was but it's designed to be a census of that moment in time on that day in a pandemic. This is what it looks like.
Yeah.
What it isn't is a statistical tool in a sense that then gives you the ability to say, well, how quickly do we think that population will bounce back? Will it look completely different? Will the patterns, the workforce stuff is fascinating because it misses workers altogether, because a lot of them weren't in the places that they would have been if they were in an office or living near an office. But it also has those changing factors, as you've described, that patterns and habits have changed and what happens if they adjust back. So there's a number of challenges like that. And I think, anybody working across sort of the core cities, the big cities across the country have all got this similar problem to Manchester, that we think there's a significant undercount in what the census will produce. And then ONS are really struggling then methodologically to come up with rebase forecasts to say, well, this is how we believe that is undercounted or not. So, there are some real challenges with it. And we are asking the question about whether it will ever really be useful other than a historic sort of marker for this is what it looked like on that day. But I know ONS are looking at lots of admin data-based models. And that's what we're trying to influence at the moment, to say, let's get those accurate and not worry too much about what happened in March 2021 when this was done.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the census pool, but I'm not least because I think it does something quite unique that will be useful in 100 years' time when they actually release the details of it. But we need some good annual admin, population data, from admin sources. No reason why it can't be done. And actually, I kind of think there's no reason why ONS really shouldn't be using, or certainly exploring, data from devices, overnight dwell, daytime dwell, just in terms of knitting together the sort of estimates of residential occupancy and particularly workplace occupancy, I think.
Yeah, interesting that we've been piloting some of that locally to try and sort of help our local understanding and using that. ONS are a little bit more reluctant to it because I think their challenge is how do they make it statistically valid across the whole country. which then becomes a bit more complicated for them. But yeah, we are working hard on that with them.
Yeah, no, good to hear. Good to hear.
Okay,
It's not,
that was a
not
really
simple.
interesting conversation. Is there anything else you need to add? As a lay person, speaking on behalf of Joe Public, this discussion has highlighted to me how important data collection is, and accurate data, and people are reluctant to give their information. I think there should be some sort of article written in really simple language explaining that this is what we could do before the pandemic because we had accurate information. This is what we're struggling to do post-pandemic because we haven't got the accurate information. When we ask you to fill in your information because we want to collect your data, this is what you're helping us with.
Yeah,
Just to get the public on side. The public aren't on side.
There's a big element to that isn't discussed as much though, which is whether you trust the organization you're providing the data with not to breach.
Yeah.
Because I think that there is I think we've come a long way in convincing people that data can be used anonymously and aggregated to be useful without breaking privacy. The problem is when you provide that data, the organizations that you're providing it to have a long history of egregious data breaches, and so I think that's a fair concern for people. You've got to collect it and store it in some way. You've got to convince people that it's secure.
But those same people will be on Facebook telling everyone where they live when they go on holiday, and that's another cage rattle.
You can provide your data to a private organisation, Jan, just not to the government, obviously.
I think
on that note,
I was just going to say very quickly, we've had that discussion quite a bit around, it's trying to get into the mindset of why, individuals feel that way. What it always comes back to is that it's basically individuals recognise the value of their own data. So actually, access to a free platform like Facebook is worth the cost they put on their personal data to allow it. They don't see the payback from offering it to local government or government to be able to sort of provide services in a more streamlined way. And we need to do more on that around how do we sell the benefits of it to say, look, if we don't have this, you either get a poorer quality service or it costs you more to access those services. So,
well, that is what Facebook has done. Facebook has said, if you want to use any of our features, you've got to give us that information. And people go on Facebook because they want those features, so they give over their information.
Yeah.
So it's you're not offering them enough of a carrot to give them the information. You need apps and stuff to go.
I think we talked about this a few years ago, didn't we? I seem to remember, because we routinely now at Sainsbury's share information with ONS. Nothing PII, nothing personally identifiable, but in terms of sales and right down to every stock keeping unit, and where it's sold and when it's sold. I suppose 6 or 7 years ago, when we first started talking about the value of that, there was a lot of nervousness about, what if it gets in the Daily Mail? Thankfully that's completely gone away. But back then, I think it occurred to me that data doesn't have it doesn't have a platform in the public's mind. So science, all right, we'll wheel out Brian Cox, and he'll do he'll evangelize about science and astrophysics and whatever, and he can get on primetime BBC, and he can do that. There's been other things like Dallas Campbell and Hannah Fry doing in-depth sort of series on, I don't know, on air travel, you know, and the volume of air travel and how it all works. But there's no one has ever attempted to do that for our industry. And for the good, you know, for the good, the benefits, and you know, as you say, Stevie, the watch outs in terms of you know, people stepping over the line.
I think there's a real, and maybe it just happened over time, but it seems to be that most people don't really consider that the organizations, so Facebooks or whatever, who are essentially profiting off the data, that's their IP, that's their big thing that they have.
Yeah.
By not providing it to a public institution, you're essentially forcing that institution to either buy it off of a private corporation or do without it. Both of those lead to less efficient public spending, and public spending is what everybody gets riled about. So if you can just join that narrative up and say, by the way, we could save a load of money if you were to donate us the value of your anonymized data en masse. You know, that seems like something that you could get people on board with, but it seems too many degrees of freedom removed. People sort of don't follow that all the way through in their subconscious or whatever, you know.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I've had several ideas actually. I did say at the beginning of the pandemic that Doug was missing a loop, and I didn't know what the loop was because data was so in everyone's face, and people were so interested in the numbers and the charts and everything that they wouldn't have even looked at before, that I figured we were missing a loop. And Stevie, I think you've just identified the loop that we were missing, and I'm hoping we haven't missed the boat completely.
Well, I think you could do a really simple case study of, say, I don't know, some decision that some council needs to make somewhere, right? That decision in the context of having no data or only the traditional data that they have versus that same decision in the context of knowing more detailed information about the population they serve. The decision made with more detail might be solved slightly differently and require slightly more resource, but results in a more efficient spend and a better result. Whereas the previous decision respects people not wanting to provide their data, but results in a less granular decision, and therefore more people who feel unserved and, you know, all of the things that come with making the wrong decision. So there's certainly a give and take, but I think that there are ways that could be very easily described and the story told, etc., etc.
It's
You just
basically
sort of need a
it's basically
platform.
an ongoing blog of sound bites of what you've just said, followed up with a more detailed article or blog. It's up there. I'm just waiting for it to sort of filter through to some sort of idea. But there's
Or get in touch when you can make me a millionaire, Jen.
Me first. I've got to pay my energy bill this year, so I'm definitely going first. Okay.
I was going to say that there might be some opportunity that links into what I'm going to talk about in a second. So the cost of living stuff. You know, what I'm looking for there is, you know, how do we have a more collective effort in terms of understanding the challenges and coming up with combined and joined up responses. So, you know, that might be a good area for the group to think about if members of Doug have got ideas and think about, well, this is what we could put into the mix to help the understanding, or this is what we could do in terms of joining up our responses and common challenges. There might be something in that we could document and use in that sort of blog format.
Perfect segue, Paul.